Here's a story from one of my patients that wanted to fight, and it didn't start out that way, but once the fuse was lit, the entire hospital got involved. Let's go. This patient was transported to the emergency department by EMS due to an intentional drug overdose, and after his initial evaluation, he was admitted to the ICU. Upon arrival, he was a young, athletic-appearing male, probably in his 30s, a little rough around the edges, with a flat affect and irritable mood. Now, while I do try to connect with all of my patients, I was especially proactive in this case because I was concerned that he would potentially become angry and/or violent just based on his demeanor and body language upon arrival. One thing that I need to note is that he had a sitter with him upon arrival, and for those that don't know, a sitter is generally just a CNA who sits with the patient who's confused, pulling at lines, is suicidal, belligerent, or posing a harm to themselves or others. So day one, which was Saturday, he was doing completely fine. He did have the sitter with him who I replaced for lunch so they could go eat, and when I switched out with them, they had been sitting out in the hallway. But again, I wanted to take a proactive approach with this guy, so I moved the chair next to the bed and we started chatting. I asked him about his background, if he needed anything, just little things like that. And prior to us speaking, he had been sitting in silence, but based on our conversation, I learned that he really liked music. That was like a love language for him. So I logged onto the computer and found a music channel that he liked, and we just sat there listening to music and talking. It wasn't anything major, but sometimes the little things can really make a big difference. And that was the extent of my time with him on Saturday, but before I left, I did talk to the nurse to ensure that the night shift would keep the music playing for him. And that takes us into day 2, Sunday, which started out very similar to day 1. I relieved the sitter so they could go eat, and that's when it started. In a single instant, he erratically transitioned from calmly resting in bed to standing up, ripping his IVs out, and trying to storm out of the hospital. However, due to the suicide attempt which landed him in the hospital in the first place, he had been placed on a hold and he was unable to leave. So we call security, and while we're waiting for them, he's getting dressed. The nurse pulls out the IV just so he doesn't rip it out and hurt himself more, and he starts walking out to the family waiting area. So at this point, security's there. He made it out to the family waiting area, and I'm just sort of tagging along to make sure that nobody gets hurt. This was my first encounter with this type of scenario, so I wasn't quite sure what the hospital did or didn't want me to do. So rather than actively restraining the patient, again, I was just hanging back to make sure that nobody got hurt. And then the situation ignited. He aggressed toward one of our nurses and security guards, and I had strategically placed myself behind him in case he did just that. For those that don't know, I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for several years now, so I'm at least relatively comfortable in a scenario like this. So I lock in what we call a seatbelt grip with my left arm under his left armpit and my right arm over his right shoulder, and I lock it in here so it's fashioned like a seatbelt across his torso. One thing that I do want to stress is that this is completely harmless. It's not putting pressure on his carotid arteries or choking him in any way. It's just a position of control, which allowed us to, number 1, help to ensure that no one got hurt, him or us, and then number 2, it gave us more time to defuse the situation. And after some talking down, he did finally agree to go back to the room to sort this out. So I let go, and although he's agreed to go back to the room, he is not happy whatsoever. He goes to slam open the ICU doors, which require you to scan your badge in to open. So he slams into them, they don't open, and he nails his head on the door, giving him this nice big bloody gash on his forehead. So after we scan in, he's now walking back to the room, leaving a nice bloody trail from this gash that he now has on his forehead. Once we get him back into the room, he starts pacing around very quickly, acting like he's ready to throw down. At this point, lots of people have gathered, nurses, techs, doctors, security guards, and police officers as well. And this is only agitating him more, but I'm trying to get through to him at this point, so I say, hey, forget about everyone else here and focus only on me. And I can see that base of trust that we had developed the day before shining through just a little bit. I ask him if he remembers what brought him to the hospital in the first place and why we want him to stay. He says no, so I tell him, you tried to kill yourself, and our fear is that if we let you go right now, you're going to kill yourself. And we really care about you, and we don't want that to happen. And I can see that that resonated with him a little bit, almost as if he had never experienced that level of concern before, which maybe he hadn't. And actually, after a bit more talking down, he did finally agree to get back in bed and resume treatment. I had gotten through to him, and that was an amazing feeling. If only that were the whole story. So fast forward to the following weekend, I get to work and I see that he was transferred to one of the general medical floors, essentially meaning that he no longer requires ICU level care. i.e. he's getting better. A few hours into my shift, a code Armstrong alarms over the intercom and is coming from a general medical floor. And for those that don't know, at least in my hospital, a code Armstrong signifies that a patient is becoming belligerent or violent, and we generally respond by sending one male from each floor to essentially say that this behavior will not be tolerated. So I answer the call along with a male ICU nurse who was on that day, and when we get up there, there's a sea of people gathered already: CNAs, nurses, doctors, managers, security guards, and even police officers. I work my way to the front of the crowd, and lo and behold, it's this patient from the weekend before, and at this point, he's ripped off the IV pole from the back of the bed, which is essentially just a big heavy pipe. He's wielding it as a weapon, swinging it around, and he'd actually already bashed the TV in with it. So as I'm working my way to the front of the crowd, I call out to him, "Hey, it's Josh." And he immediately recognizes me from our previous time together, and with the large pipe still in hand, I step into the room, although maintaining a healthy distance outside of his swinging radius. The stimulus of the crowd and just the general situation was very obviously making him nervous, so again I tried to get him just to focus on me, and despite the sea of people that had gathered, we were actually able to have a one-on-one conversation. I was able to eventually get him to drop the pipe, and he finally then agreed to get back into bed and peacefully accepted medication from the ICU nurse. On a side note, I have to give credit to this ICU nurse. I don't know if they would want me saying their name here, but they were absolutely amazing. While I was attempting to reconnect with the patient, they were working crowd control. He was able to get everyone to back out of the immediate area, which further helped to calm the patient down. It was also thanks to this nurse's calm demeanor, along with his honest, articulate communication, that the patient finally agreed to peacefully receive medication. So at the end of all of this, the scene was unrecognizable compared to when we first got there. When we first arrived, someone was either about to be hit with a metal pipe, tasered, or both. And at the end, the nurse and myself, we were just sitting at the foot of the bed, laughing and joking with the patient, who was also just laying in bed, resting comfortably and without restraints. It was awesome. We ordered him some food to help keep him calm and happy, said our goodbyes, and then returned to our patients in the ICU. The takeaway here is that connecting with your patients can be one of the biggest things that you do. You really should be trying to do this with all of your patients to the best of your ability, but especially in situations like this that have the potential to blow up, that trust that you build up can go a long way. This was a really dangerous situation that arose, and thankfully we were able to defuse it, but had I not built that foundation of trust up with this patient the weekend before, it very well may have ended differently. If the story resonated with you in any way, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one, and if you're sticking around, here's some other videos that you might enjoy.